doping test only detects them about 40% of the time. I could do a whole video on the ineffectiveness of anti-doping infrastructure. Now, whilst it is easier to avoid tests if you know what you're doing, there is still a certain amount of planning and knowledge required to pass these tests, especially if you're taking larger quantities of drugs and they're being tested a little more often. I wonder if the reason that Kenyan athletes are overrepresented in doping statistics is not just because they necessarily dope more, but because of the Kenyan athletes that do decide to dope, a higher proportion of them are caught compared to the Western athletes who decide to dope. And the reason for this is that the Kenyan athletes lack access to advanced doping technologies that the Western athletes can easily use. Things like designer drugs, specific strains of PEDs that do not flag up in testing or are harder to detect. For instance, Sera is an advanced strain of EPO that is not only more effective than the conventional REPO that most Kenyans are caught with at stimulating red blood cell production, but is also much harder to detect in urine samples, instead requiring specific dry spot blood testing. If you have an athlete part of a richer country who has access to more sophisticated doping technology, such as Sera, they are much less likely to be caught than someone taking less developed PEDs. I mean, athletes have been known to hire specific experts to help them plan their PED usage in a way to minimize detection in tests. They also have to take regular blood tests to ensure that certain biological markers boosted by PEDs do not regularly exceed the allowed threshold. Even if traces of specific drugs are out of your system, sudden elevations in markers like hemoglobin level will warrant suspicion unless hidden by masking agents and very controlled drug doses. I find it hard to believe that a humble Kenyan runner from a rural village will have the same access to this medical infrastructure than your average Western athlete. And so when we see a boost in testing like we have seen in Kenya, tests that would be much easier to evade for athletes with strong resources become much more effective at catching someone with limited doping technology, and therefore we see more Kenyans popping. The reason it is especially bad in Kenya, and not also present in similarly poor countries like another athletics powerhouse, Ethiopia, is because unlike many other nations, Kenya has actually massively boosted their testing due to international pressure. And whilst these tests are far from foolproof, they will catch athletes who are unprepared. Now we've discussed in detail drug doping in Kenya, but there still remains the issue of age cheating. This recently came to light after the AIU began an investigation on 34 Kenyan athletes, including some Olympians who had allegedly lied about their age to qualify for age-specific events. It is important to note that no Kenyan, or any of the athletes for that matter, has ever been directly banned for age cheating. But there are some cases that have left fans suspicious. You see a lot of East African prodigies who fail to continue their success in the under-20 category as their career continues. Many people chalk that up to the athletes actually being in their early to mid-20s whilst they're competing in the under-20 category, and thus in the theoretical prime of their fitness. However, once they move up to the senior category, they are actually in their mid to late 20s and thus past the physical prime, which explains the sudden drop off in time. This is not helped by the aged appearance of many of these Kenyan prodigies. A good example is Edward Zakaya, a Kenyan athlete who was once World Under-20 champion in 2018, running 13 minutes 20 to Kangor. He never hit that same form since, and in the last few years put forward very mediocre times compared to his old fitness. When you would only expect him to improve at his age, Zakaya is 23, but judging by his appearance, he could easily pass off as being 30. He actually posted documentation verifying his age after so many people accused him of age cheating. More modern and high-profile examples are the late men's marathon record holder Kelvin Gibson, who was also in his early 20s. Another super recent one is 1500-meter prodigy Fangal Courage, who burst onto the scene with an under-20 world record at age 18. He similarly has garnered scrutiny by athletics fans, including myself, over his age appearance. This issue is especially bad in Kenya for the economic and social reasons mentioned, and the fact that documentation is much easier to forge there than in Europe and the US. Documents are also just generally less used. Again, a birth in a rural Kenyan village home is much less likely to have an accurate birth certificate than most births in Western countries. So for some people it may not even be intentional. Age documentation is just less used in the country. And again, no one has been officially banned, but it's easy to see why some cases warrant suspicion. So with all this in mind, should Kenya be banned? They are statistically one of the worst countries for doping athletics, and the recent age cheating scandals do not help their reputation. I suppose it depends on what you think warrants banning.
So watu wanakimbia,
paradoxical aspect of
wanajifanya wanakimbia.
all people you catch,
Tukieko tu nacho.
better job you're doing. People will always try.
Mimi na brother yangu na wase tuambia watu usitumie Red Bull,
That's not necessarily
no hype drinks,
and this makes measuring success
steroid,
difficult. On the one
no
hand,
protein shakes, you nini what,
you look
maji
like
tu na chakula.
because loads of people.
Amutushendi.
On the other hand, if you want catching,
Mimi na brother yangu tunawashinda nyinyi wote, yani wote.
one of the ideas I want to challenge
Tuweke tu yani mwili sasa. Kunywa maji,
and whilst I do think this idea is somewhat
kula chakula yenye natural, normal. Nyinyi amutushendi bana. Unatumia madawa sana. Boxing dawa. Aile athlete saizi vitu yote dawa. Wanatumia dawa na kuwa fit. Lakini natural. Amuko si ni natural. Mona, hii body yangu ni natural. Everything I do when I run natural, anything I do natural. It's just hard work on my mind and my body.
And despite all the issues that are going on here, the UK is nowhere near as poor a country as Kenya. What's worse, our testing rate prior to the champs was actually better than Australia, Italy and France. So it's not just that the UK is bad, it's that many developed nations have terrible testing regimes. This is a page on the UK website which lists every single British athlete competing in athletics who's currently serving a ban for doping.
If a car finance deal was missold, which basically means if it contained hidden commission fees, which by the way it's reported millions did, then you could be owed thousands for each one. All I did was enter my name, date of...
Right, no one in the UK is currently serving an active ban. Now I say this as someone who is proud of UK athletics, of the grassroots culture we have, and of the achievements of many British athletes on the athletic stage. But you cannot look me in the eye and convince me that not a single British athlete today is doping. If you haven't banned anyone recently, it's not because our country is full of angels who don't dope, it's because you're not catching them. Now yes, the systemic corruption and network of PEDs in Kenya does make me think it is especially bad.
Kumbe hase inaonekana kwa ubaya, wanapigana vizuri, wako on the top, wanaonekana na fit, lakini nacho hase mtu mnono anashinda vitu, hayuko fit. Angalia, yani si tuko fit yani. Ikikuja fitness nacho, haki ya Mungu walai. Tukiona machampion wao ndio represent dunia sijui worldwide the athletics superstar. Mimi nawashinda haki ya Mungu kwa boxing, karate, anything tweko. Too much dope, yani wanajua. Something go fucked up big time.
So based on this criteria, how strong exactly is Kenya's anti-doping infrastructure? Well, we should know that this is not the first time that the country has been
using so much drug
prior to the Rio
in
Olympics
everything.
2016. Kenya risked being barred from the
Boxing, they're using drug.
Non-compliance.
Anything. Running, anything, they're using drug. Lifting weight, the one you don't, you cannot use protein shake, protein energy drink. It's not bad. Or steroid is not bad. Why you cannot get that, all of those things in the food? Drink water and eat them in the food. There's protein, there's anything in the food. Eat food then. Don't use drink. No, you're lying. That is a drug. There's no, if you're taking protein shake, there's no difference with you and someone who's smoking cocaine. Drug, that is drug. To me, drug is drug. Alcohol. Fuck that, man. It's crazy.
They slashed this investment by 90%. Yes, you heard that right. 90%. Almost
it's not fair. It's not fair, man.
The following October, while it did meet with Kenyan officials, citing the cuts as a major concern, but they concluded
they're working so hard. Other people they're using dodges.
After 6 months of turmoil, it was finally announced in June of 2025, aka last month, that the funding would be partially reinstated to only $1.4 million. Almost $1 million less than last year, and less than a third of the initially pledged amount. And I've not been able to find any statement from WADA, the AIU, or World Athletics on these failed pledges. It's good that Kenya has boosted their testing compared to previous levels and eventually somewhat reinstated the funding. But these governing organizations have let an athletics powerhouse in Kenya compete with 6 months of basically non-functional testing. What's worse, this came while Kenya submitted a bid to host the 2029 World Athletics Championships and pumped investment into a new stadium and training center to support this. Kenya absolutely should invest into these things, but making huge cuts to anti-doping infrastructure whilst boosting funding into a new stadium...
all one.
I don't think that this
worldwide. They put, like, why using drug? Oh, it can build your energy flow, like, I don't know, blood flow. Your energy to be good, your immune system. No. Competition is all about natural. Let's see who has good genes, who has proper hard work, natural, mind power. Let's see that. There's no energy drink, no. No, anything like can boost your body, no. Go to competition, natural. Just eat normal food and water. We meet in competition. But boosting all this will boost your blood flow to make your skin to be blushing, to make your mind to think it's not bad. No, drug is drug, man. It's fucked up. Well, it's fucked up.